So, having said that, I now move on to the final part of this talk. Okay, so we have these mutant lines with the clone genes, and by the way, here's Adam Amsterdam. And these are, each tank carries a single line of fish with an insert in a gene which is essential, and so it's lethal as a homozygote, but viable as a heterozygote, okay? And there we have these lines of fish. We have 550 lines of fish, and here we have 335 different clone genes identified. So, of course, I have to confess, we had not thought about this to begin with. After the fact, however, it's obvious. And that is, not only can you, of course, screen for embryonic phenotypes, but adults might have phenotypes as heterozygotes. And in fact, one of the things we should have been thinking about many tumor suppressor genes are active as heterozygotes and lethal. They can be lethal as homozygotes, but as heterozygotes, they're tumor suppressors or cancer genes of some kind or other. And we should have really thought about that, but we didn't. However, the following thing happened. Yes, as I said, we had found only one dominant mutation before this. What happened was that these lines of fish, which are maintained as heterozygotes, so each tank consists just of the heads. We throw away generally the non-carrier siblings of the fish that have the inserts, right? So each tank's got just in it fish with an insert in the gene that's lethal as a homozygote, but viable as a heterozygote. My lab manager, a woman named Sarah Farrington, is the most meticulous person I think I've met in my life, one of the most. And she is responsible for maintaining these 550 lines of fish. She's been doing this, established this whole thing, set it up, got it to work. And in the course of maintaining the lines, that means every year and a half or 2 years, you have to remake the fish to carry on the line. You have to raise a new stock. And she would go to the tank and she would discover that sometimes the fish were missing. Now, when fish are missing from a tank, it really isn't very meaningful, because over a year and a half, many people use the lab. If somebody leaves the lid on the tank slightly ajar, fish jump. You come in the morning and there are dried fish on the floor. So fish missing was not a meaningful statement. However, when I told her I wasn't that impressed initially, she was quite insulted and turned and showed me the actual data. And I was really impressed. First of all, it was true over successive generations for certain lines, and she began tracking them because she was afraid she might lose the line if too many fish were missing. Second of all, the loss in general was really very low. I mean, in most lines, over a 2-year period, she wouldn't expect to lose more than 10% of the fish, or she'd be quite concerned about the quality of control in our lab. And so she was really tracking this, and she was watching it carefully. And the other thing, as she began to watch more carefully, was she noticed that in these tanks where fish were jumping or disappearing or wherever they were going, when she went and looked, often she saw fish that had these bulges on them, and for all the world looked to her like tumors. So the initial observation was that in these tanks with missing fish, there were fish with really gross tumors, apparent tumors. And a postdoc who came to the lab, Kirsten Eddipley, said, you know, you really got to look at this person named Rod Bronson, decided that these very visible tumors were closely resembled something called a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor. And what's interesting about them, they come up very quickly. So the fish are there 1 minute, you go in the next week, and you'll see this really quite gigantic tumor. So they come up, and then the fish disappear or die if you don't find them in time and take them out. What was interesting about it is, when this first happened, was if you say, okay, well, what is the gene? What is this fish heterozygous for? It's got an insert, and what is the gene that is mutated in this line of fish which is predisposed to get this kind of cancer? And the first 2 cases that were identified, in both cases, the line was heterozygous for a mutation in the gene encoding a ribosomal protein. So, of course, we had a good laugh over this because it seemed so ridiculous. How could genes encoding ribosomal proteins, mutations in them, predispose you to cancer? Okay,